Hey guys, so I just got done watching WWE Wrestlemania 2020 38
2020?
night 2
It's not 2020.
2022, and I just thought I'd do a quick video to sort of give my thoughts on the show. So
You gotta restart
it's
it.
too cold outside, I'm not going out there. So, overall, I thought the show was pretty good. I think it certainly lived up to the quality of the previous night's show. And since WrestleMania is probably one of the biggest wrestling events of the year, you know, it's it's big enough now that it needs to be two nights. So I think they certainly delivered on that and proved that it warrants the two-night show versus a one-night show of previous WrestleManias. So the first match was RK Bro, which is Randy Orton and Riddle, versus the Street Profits, which is Angelo Dawkins and Montez Ford, versus Alpha Academy, which is Chad Gable and Otis, for in a triple threat tag team match for the Raw Tag Team Championship. So I thought that match was pretty good. All all those teams involved, all three of those teams are, they're pretty good tag teams. So when you put three teams like that together, you're gonna get a good match. I think it was a pretty good opener too. It really got you in a good mood to watch the you know, 8 hour show of WrestleMania Night 2. In the end, RK Bro retained after two amazing RKOs. First, Riddle springboards and RKO's Montez Ford, and then Orton counters a diving move with an RKO to score the pinfall win. The RKO is probably one of the best finishers of all of WWE. So overall, I thought that match was pretty good. The next match, let me see. I believe the next match was Bobby Lashley versus Amos in a singles match. So, you know, Omos, he's gotten pretty good, over time. He certainly was a bit green coming in, but I think that in the time that he spent with AJ Styles, who is one of the best wrestlers in WWE, I think he has, learned a lot since he debuted, and now he's gotten to be a pretty good wrestler. And Bobby Lashley, of course, has been a wrestler for a number of years now, so, he's pretty good as well. Uh, the match ended with Bobby Lashley winning via a spear, which I thought was pretty good because, Bobby Lashley, I think, is definitely of that main event caliber. And, he needs to get some more victories in if they're going to keep him in that main event picture. So I'm glad that they are doing that. The next match was a Johnny Knoxville versus Samuel Zayn in a singles match. So, I thought this match was pretty good. Obviously, Johnny Knoxville is not a trained professional wrestler, but he was still able to put on a pretty good match with Sami Zayn. And I think that really speaks to how good of a wrestler that Sami Zayn is, because he was able to carry Johnny Knoxville to a pretty good match. There was a lot of interference from other members of the Jack Butt crew, including Chris Pontius and Wee Man. At one point, they pulled out a table that was covered in mouse traps, which I thought was pretty good. It was a pretty good alteration to a table to make it that much more devastating to whoever eventually goes through said table. And in the end, Johnny Knoxville won after putting Sami Zayn into a giant mouse trap. It looks like the mouse trap didn't go off properly at first, but Johnny Knoxville was able to improvise to get the mouse trap to properly deploy. So I thought that was pretty good. You know, sometimes things don't go exactly as you plan, but you gotta just work through it and get the spot in, and Johnny Knoxville was able to do that. So because of that, I thought the match was pretty good. The next match was Queen Zelina and Carmella versus Sasha Banks and Naomi versus Natalya and Shayna Baszler versus Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley for the Women's Tag Team Championship. And, I thought this was a pretty good match, sometimes I don't really particularly care for these multi-tag team matches where there are only two legal competitors at one time. I think they can get a little difficult to follow, but they did a pretty good job of rotating teams and competitors in and out of the ring, so you were able to see a lot of different spots from the different wrestlers. In the end, Sasha Banks and Naomi won with a pretty unique tag team move against, I believe it was Carmella, but I'm not entirely sure on that. I'm going to have to search that on Bing later on to confirm, but I know that Sasha Banks and Naomi were able to win the tag team titles, which I thought was pretty good because there was a lot of callbacks to their former time as a part of Team BAD, which stood for Beautiful and Dangerous. I'm hopeful that they'll bring Tamina back in with them to fully reunite Team BAD, and maybe we could see, a reincarnation of that whole storyline of the Diva Revolution, and they could bring back Team Bella and Team PCB, formerly known as the Submission Sorority, and I think that would be pretty good. So I'm hopeful that they could bring all those folks back in, bring back in the Bella Twins and Paige and Alicia Fox, and we could get a resurgence, a reincarnation of that feud. I think that would be pretty good. The next match was AJ Styles versus Edge. Now, I'll admit at this point, I don't know if you know this or not, but my sister brought over these hard Mountain Dews the other night, and I didn't know that these had alcohol in them. I thought they were just, like extra strength Mountain Dews. So I had drunk about like 14 of these hard Mountain Dews at this point. So I kind of fell asleep during this match. I later found out that these are not, in fact, extra strength Mountain Dews. They are alcoholic Mountain Dews. But, overall, these hard Mountain Dews are pretty good, so you can't get these everywhere, but if you see them, you should definitely get some hard Mountain Dews. But just be aware that they do have alcohol in them. They are not extra strength Mountain Dews. They are alcoholic Mountain Dews. But, I did end up waking back up towards the end of the AJ Styles and Edge match. I will say that just due to the fact that AJ Styles and Edge are in the match, and definitely from what I saw, the match was pretty good, you know? In the end, Edge was able to win with a spear after AJ Styles was distracted from Damian Priest standing there at ringside. And it appears that Damian Priest and Edge might be forming some type of alliance together. I'm not quite sure what that will look like, but I'm pretty excited to see where this goes. But that match was pretty good. The next match was the New Day of Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods versus Sheamus and Ridge Holland, accompanied by Butch. So, this match was pretty short, but I thought it was pretty entertaining. It was short, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a bad match, It was still pretty good. It didn't overstay its welcome, It was fast paced. Everyone got their stuff in. It was high energy. In the end, Sheamus won with a brogue kick. But I think Sheamus is definitely a future Hall of Famer and highly underrated. So I'm glad to see him pick up a WrestleMania victory against the New Day, so I thought that match was pretty good. The next match was Pat McAfee versus Austin Theory. So, similar to the Johnny Knoxville and Samuel Zayn match that we saw earlier, Pat McAfee is not technically a trained professional wrestler. So, I think it really speaks to Austin Theory's capabilities that he is able to perform at such a high level with Pat McAfee, who is not technically a trained professional wrestler, but because Austin Theory is technically a trained professional wrestler, and is skilled in his craft, he was able to carry Pat McAfee to a pretty good match. Pat McAfee at one point put on his commentary headset and was live commentating his own WrestleMania match, which I thought was pretty good because that's not something that you see very often, and it was pretty entertaining to hear that live commentary from one of the competitors in the match. Pat McAfee won with a roll-up. And then afterwards, there was an impromptu match between Pat McAfee and Vince McMahon Jr. And I thought that was pretty good because, Vince McMahon Jr. is pretty old at this point, so you don't see him do a lot of things physically at this point. So the fact that he was able to do a match with Pat McAfee, who is not technically a trained professional wrestler, I thought that was pretty good. In the end, Vince kicked Pat McAfee in the stomach with a American football and got the pinfall victory, which I thought was pretty good because, Pat McAfee is not technically a trained professional wrestler, whereas Vince McMahon is. So, it makes sense that a trained professional wrestler would win a match against someone who has not been who is not technically a trained professional wrestler. After that, there was a segment between Vince McMahon Jr. and Stone Cold Steve Austin. I thought that was pretty good because it was a pretty good callback to the classic Vince McMahon Jr. and Stone Cold Steve Austin feuds of the mid to late 90s and early 2000s. So we got to see a lot of the beer drinking and Stone Cold stunning Vince, which was good. And then Stone Cold drank beer and stunned Pat McAfee, which I thought that was pretty good. Pat McAfee is not technically a trained professional wrestler, but because Stone Cold Steve Austin is technically a trained professional wrestler, he was able to safely perform the Stone Cold Stunner on Pat McAfee, and Pat McAfee was not seriously injured due to Stone Cold Steve Austin performing the Stone Cold Steve Austin Stunner onto Pat McAfee. But I thought all the interactions with Stone Cold and Vince McMahon and Pat McAfee and Austin Theory, I thought those were they were pretty good. The final match was the championship unification match with Brock Lesnar, who is the WWE champion, and Roman Reigns, who is the Universal champion. I thought that match was pretty good. It was being billed as the biggest WrestleMania match in history. And, I think that's appropriate because it is a title unification match. So technically, unless you were unifying 3 or more titles, you could not say technically that there has been a bigger match taking place at WrestleMania. So, as we usually see with Brock Lesnar matches, they're pretty fast paced. There's not a lot of filler within the match. It's pretty much big move after big move. But, that's what we've come to expect with Brock Lesnar at this point. And, I thought that was pretty good because, you don't want to be bored in your main event of WrestleMania. You just want to get to the action. And I think Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar definitely delivered on that. In the end, Roman Reigns won with multiple spears, and I'm happy to say that I bet my entire life savings on this match for Roman Reigns to win. So, that's pretty good because, now I'm gonna have, previously I had like $800 in my bank account, but now I have like $1,600 in my bank account, so that's pretty good. So I'm happy that Roman Reigns was able to win the match and get me $800. So overall, WrestleMania 38, 2022, whatever you want to call it, night 2, I thought it was pretty good.